I wanted to start, and this could be addressed maybe to Courtney or Howie or Bruce, but we had a number of questions about what are the steps. So if I'm noticing changes in my memory or thinking, or I'm noticing changes in a friend or loved one, what are the steps that I can actually take to get medical attention and to get access to some of these exciting new tests and treatments that were discussed? I don't know. Maybe Howie, do you want to start? And if others have something to add?
Turn them on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think the first answer is to speak to your primary care doctor about it, so they can think about those complaints in the context of other health problems. And I think we have to acknowledge that different primary care physicians might have different approaches to this, and I think it's okay to if you're getting a feeling back from them that they think you're okay and don't worry about it, implying that you're not doing too badly and you seem fine to me. I think it's okay to push back and ask for a little bit more assessment, but I think that's the important place to start. And then certainly there's community neurologists, and the Memory and Aging Center is a great place for them to make a referral if they feel like once they've done an initial assessment that you need a more thorough assessment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna chime in. I got several, like this whole stack of questions that are kind of the same about this treatment, and so yes, you want to get, if you're really concerned, you want to get referred to a facility that does do these evaluations. So here in the Bay Area, there's us, there's the Dolby Center over at CPMC, Kaiser, sort of wherever your PCP will refer you to, where you can actually get to see a behavioral neurologist. In terms of these treatments, just to sort of, a lot of questions for, again, about access. In terms of cost, I'm sure the cost is going to go up every year, as everything does, but it's around $25,000 to $30,000 a year. Medicare will cover 80% of that, and then gap plans will often cover the rest. And then for patients who don't have Medicare, we're finding that other insurance plans will typically cover it as well. They just may require some extra documentation. And then in terms of a wait list, it's just a matter of finding a facility that can give it to you. And then one of the questions was, can I also be taking donepezil while I get this treatment? And the answer is yes. Oftentimes when patients are a new patient to me, I'll be starting them on both meds at around the same time. And then I'll just follow up the last couple of questions that were about Leqembi. And so one was, if it gets rid of the amyloid plaques, which it does very well, why doesn't it stop the disease? And the answer to that is because it's not really doing much for the tau. And we also don't really understand fully why these proteins are accumulating in the first place. And we're certainly not doing anything to tackle the why they're accumulating with Leqembi. And then the other question is, is that going to be the best anti-amyloid treatment that we see, or is something better coming down the pipeline? And there are some companies that are working on anti-amyloid therapeutics that should have less of that ARIA side effect and should work a little bit faster. I still think they're not going to be, again, the thing that stops the disease, but there should be better versions of those drugs coming in the future.
I just wanted to make one comment about our clinic, which is I think we're able to see about 75% of people when we get a referral within 8 weeks or something like that, we're able to at least get people scheduled. And so Dr. Melanie Stevens, who leads our clinic, has just done an amazing job, and we're very dedicated to trying to see people as fast as possible. So that's really important. One just word about these new treatments. I think that, Courtney's presentation showed you that it took a good 10, 15 years of research, and that means people volunteering to be in these drug trials. And that, when Dr. Miller talks about empathy and altruism, I think being in a clinical trial is such an example of that, because when people agree to participate, they don't know if they're going to get treatment or placebo, they don't know if the drug's going to work, they don't know if it's going to be safe. But really, through the thousands of people who volunteered to be in these trials, we got to treatments that are starting to change the course of the disease. They're just the beginning, they're not the last word. And I had just this amazing experience of being able to call one of my patients who was in a clinical trial and tell them that the trial was successful, that it was a positive trial, that the drug worked. And boy, what an exciting moment for our field to be able to share that kind of good news. Little bit different topic. We got a number of questions about NIH funding. How much does the Memory and Aging Center receive in NIH grants? Are there any threats to continued funding of science in general? This is a hard question, so I'm going to defer to Dr. Miller, if you don't mind answering that.
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen since 2016 is quite a significant increase in our funding support. It maintained itself and grew steadily between 2016 and 20, even accelerated so that we went from about $500 million to almost $4 billion. Do I think that made a difference in what you're hearing about today and it actually touches people? Absolutely. And I would say the tau trials that Courtney talked about has been my dream, that we would begin to see tau lowering efforts because as many of you know, I'm a Taoist. I believe that tau is critical to Alzheimer's disease and a lot of the frontotemporal dementias. So we have a huge number of, as part of that, growing budget. Adam Boxer and the trials group have a huge number of tau therapies that are beginning right now. I think they will be effective. I think some of them will be stopped early because the results will be so impressive. But yes, these are under threat. There's a different philosophy in HHS right now. What more can I say? I think all of us individually can make a difference, and all of us can speak out about the importance of real science, and I think that's what leads to progress. So, and just a comment about what the first question that Courtney started to answer is, there's been a revolution, during this time of increased funding. These blood tests that Gil and others developed, they really work. They really work, and they're cheap. I mean, should everyone get one of these blood tests if we're concerned about Alzheimer's? Yes. I just read a statistic that about 12% of people in our country with a cognitive disorder ever get seen and evaluated. So, we can make a difference now. The amyloid PET that Gil helped get approval from the FDA, this is now funded by insurance, and so we have the ability to diagnose things in a really deep and precise way, and it's getting better and better, as you heard about us from Stefania. So let's keep this progress going. We want to turn these diseases into disorders of the past, and I think in the next 15, 20 years we can do that, but not if we lose our funding.
Real quickly, Luke has to leave. Luke has to leave in a couple of minutes, so I need brain donation.
Yeah, Luke, Vanessa, did you get some questions about your nice job?
We did, although not that many questions. Like, I see papers down there, so that means we did a great job, I assume. A few questions had to do with timing, and so how important is it after a person passes that things be done quickly, and what are sort of the constraints around that? I mentioned it really briefly earlier that certain kinds of analyses, particularly looking at the expression of genes in brain tissue, require things to be processed very quickly. Otherwise, the messenger RNA, which is coming from that gene expression, degrades really rapidly over time, and so then we have nothing left to measure. So those kinds of studies gold standard when we get tissue requests from around the world for doing that kind of an analysis. From the time of death to time in the freezer needs to be about 8 hours, ideally, or even lower. After that, we sort of have to do quality control steps and see what do we have, will it work for this or not. But there are other kinds of analyses we do with antibodies and something called immunohistochemistry, where we stain the tissue looking for tau tangles and whatnot. And that can be done on tissue that's been around longer before it went into the freezer. And so we will, the impact, the benefit to all the kinds of research questions we can try to answer with the brain tissue is increased the sooner we get it, but that doesn't mean that there's a too late point. I suppose there technically is somewhere around 48 to 72 hours. It gets a little hard to be able to know what you're looking at, but even then we can sometimes make certain things work. So,
Luke, maybe I can ask a question. How does the brain donation process impact funeral arrangements, religious ceremonies, if people want an open casket? How does this affect?
And so that's the next set of couple of questions I got. And so, excuse me. So it depends on exactly what you would like to show, but almost always for an open casket, which is sort of the most visual of the options of funeral arrangements, the brain is procured in a way that you cannot see that it was taken out. Okay, there are some rare exceptions to that, depending on how your head is shaped and things, and how much hair you have. But by and large, almost nobody knows with an open casket that we obtained it. In general, the funeral parlor and mortician works with our team, and we have particular sites that we work with more often than not. So if you have questions or options about where you'd like to go, we can sort that out with you. I work with a really amazing team in the brain bank who know all the ins and outs for not just the whole Bay Area, but all 50 states. Okay, we get brains shipped to us just recently from the East Coast and from the Southeast, and so we have contacts everywhere. So it really takes sort of a bespoke solution for each person in terms of what they're looking for and where they live and what options are there. So my best advice is that if you have questions around any of this, scrolling through these slides, one of them has our office number and email address. Please call us during business hours with any of your questions. We're happy to sort them out. That's really why we're here, is to facilitate the knowledge you need to make a decision. And go ahead, Howie.
I don't know if you agree, but I think that all of this concern about timing and how important that is, there's a lot that's difficult to control, but I think it's one of the very valuable kind of lessons that I take when I hear about that is how important it is to make the decision in advance and ultimately get yourself across the line if that's a decision you can make. And I say that because we need many research participants who understandably say, well, let me think about it, which is totally understandable, but that let me think about it sort of keeps getting to be the answer. And even if deep down they might want to donate, it sometimes, for whatever reason, it just never happens. And I think that making the decision and then, understanding all the details of what you need to do to make sure that when the time comes you're ready, that's one of the things we can control about that interval between when somebody passes on and when we get to look at the brain.
Okay, let me do two fast questions, and I think we've covered this whole category. One is can you donate both brain and body? And it used to be the answer was that's really hard to do, and now we have a protocol for that. So if you're doing a whole body donation to, say, a medical school or something like that, please reach out to us because we can sort through that and make that happen. It used to be where we couldn't do that, but we can now. And then the last one was, is it just as important to donate a brain from someone who's relatively healthy cognitively versus, obviously we learn things about the disease by studying it under the microscope, and what kind of impact can that have? As you could guess maybe, the people who are most motivated to participate in brain donation are the ones who are affected by a disease. So when we study the disease, it's important to have the brain tissue there to do it, but we often are struggling to find controls. Participants rather, because they're not patients at that point, who are cognitively relatively good and have relatively healthy brains, so that we have something to compare it to. And there are ways we can get around to that, but generally healthy people, because they don't have that personal connection, aren't as motivated to participate in the process. And that's something where worldwide, not just here, we really struggle with in getting healthy brain tissue into the brain bank for those studies as well. So really important. So thanks for asking those questions.
Thanks so much. I'm going to start with Dr. Miller, and then we can march down, and everyone might pick one or two really key questions or themes that have come up and provide some brief answers.
I'll stay here for those of you I don't answer your question. But one, do we collaborate with the bug? We collaborate with everyone. This is the most opportunistic group of people that you'll ever meet. One example is we're working with Jennifer Doudna, the inventor of CRISPR, and we have an effort through the Weil Institute to develop therapies that cut out tau or cut out bad genes. So yes, we are in the richest intellectual environment imaginable. There's a million square feet on this campus of neuroscience, and if we don't take advantage of our milieu, then this is bad. So we try really hard to collaborate. Gil probably leads more collaborations around imaging across the country than you could ever imagine. So yeah, we collaborate. And here's a smart question. I don't have whoever said this, I'm really impressed. When interacting with a close relative with memory issues, is it better to double down on the highly functional brain areas, e.g. back of the brain through artistic creativities if you have frontotemporal dementia, or try to challenge the less functional brain areas to seek for a similar approach as exercise has on muscles? It's really the critical question that we think about with each and every patient. There's not one size fit all, for sure. Can you improve memory in people with Alzheimer's disease with cognitive stimulation? Yes. If it isn't too advanced. So yes, we do work with the weaker areas, but we don't forget the stronger areas either. And the empathy circuits in the front of the brain that upregulate in Alzheimer's disease. Wow, is it ever important for our Alzheimer patients to be touching grandchildren and working within families? So with all these diseases, there's strengths and weaknesses, and we try to enhance the weaknesses, but also don't forget the strengths. That's where really gratifying things can happen. And I have a lot more, but they're all smart. Yeah.
Testing. Okay. So there are a few questions that I think have a through point with stress when we think about healthy aging. So a couple of facets here that I just want to address with everyday stress, chronic stress, stress related to caregiver role. So there were questions about to what extent does stress contribute to risk of dementia, and certainly there is a large body of evidence to suggest that individuals who do experience higher levels of stress are at increased risk of dementia. To my knowledge, the literature hasn't necessarily pinned this to a specific form of dementia or a neuropathology in the brain, but generally having higher levels of stress links to worse biological outcomes like increased inflammation, poor vascular health, things that we know make your brain vulnerable to disease. Same could probably be said about caregiver stress. We know that being a caregiver puts you at increased risk of dementia. And there may be others who are welcome to chime in as to whether there's a specific link between caregiving and specific forms of dementia. My understanding of the literature is that this is also probably a complex pathway mediated by things like stress and other factors that put caregivers at risk. One other theme that I'll touch on here is related to vascular health. So there was a question about ways to increase the rate at which your blood cells recover beyond exercise. I think this is an understudied area in the context of dementia, probably a better studied area in the context of systemic conditions. So we know in post-surgery, individuals who, again, experience lower levels of stress, people who maybe practice mindfulness have faster recovery. I would suspect that there might be a link there between brain health as well. And then there was a question about statins and the connection between Alzheimer's disease. I think there's a growing body of literature epidemiologically that statin usage is associated with rates of dementia. I think the literature is a little bit mixed, but there is some evidence that shows potentially reduced. I think there might be folks here who can answer that a little bit better. We know that metabolic health and vascular health is, again, very important for brain health.
Just to touch on statins, because they're such an important drug for vascular health. The benefits to the blood vessels of taking statins if you have high cholesterol are far outweigh the risks. And so if people do have high cholesterol and your doctor's recommending a statin, absolutely the right thing to do for your brain is to take it. Occasionally, people notice that they have cognitive side effects from the statin they take, that they feel a little less sharp or have a little memory problem. There are statins that are do what they need to do in the blood, but don't get into the brain as much, and those are the ones to try if people have cognitive side effects. But I have high cholesterol, I take Lipitor. I think it is really important to emphasize that there is a benefit for vascular health.
Hello. I got one that I think could apply to a lot of people. It says, as a solo caregiver to my mom, what support group can I join online, in person, to learn how to care for her and also that can relieve my stress? So I spoke briefly, and I believe you all have the slides as well, about the Alzheimer's helpline and the support group that you can search online. So the great thing about the helpline is you can call and you can tell them what type of caregiver you are and also your schedule, and they will help find the right group for you. I've actually called and done that for people that I'm working with. So you can say, I want to be with other adult children, or I want to be with other husbands. This could be ethnicity, identity, anything, and they'll find a group that matches your schedule. So it doesn't need to be a crisis to call them. And then you can also search online by your zip code or by keywords as well. And then, somewhat related, someone asked, what advice can you give to someone caregiving for a BV/FTD individual who might be oppositional to attempts to keep them safe, but is still very physically healthy and strong and engaging? So I'm sure maybe Howie or other people could also speak to this. But I find when I work with families who are working with BV/FTD, it's really important to focus on the environment. So there might be a lot that you can't control as far as behavior, but the environment around someone you have more control in. So there's different safety devices, there's stove shutoffs, there's tracking, there are different safety things to make the environment that someone's living in very safe. You can control the environment even if sometimes you can't control the behaviors. And the AFTD, I'll just plug them, I believe it's Association for Frontal Temporal Dementia. They have a helpline as well, specifically to FTD. So you can call them and ask their opinion and different safety devices they recommend. And I'll do one more. Is that Chloe had mentioned resources through Medicare. What about for people on Medicare Advantage plans? So I don't know of any specific dementia care navigation programs through Advantage plans, but the Caregiver Resource Center that I mentioned, they don't consider insurance, so anyone can go to them, and they will find tailored resources to you. So if you don't qualify for Guide the Medicare program, I really recommend connecting with your Caregiver Resource Center, and they can find resources that would make sense for you despite insurance. And a similar question was about financial aid when you don't qualify for Medicaid, but you have income stress, which I think a lot of people fall into that kind of middle category. And I'll just plug again the Family Caregiver Resource Centers. They have legal consults, they have financial assistant programs, whether that's respite grants or just counsel. So I really recommend connecting with them.
Yes, this one's still on. So I'm going to answer, I think, just 2 questions about sort of trials and treatments that are upcoming. So one question was about, what new treatments are available for moderate Alzheimer's disease? So the anti-amyloid treatments are available only for mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. What about patients who are further along? And I will say that most of the trials in the field that are looking at disease-modifying therapies, they're really focused on that sort of earlier phase of disease, because we really do think that in terms of the biology, that's when we're going to have the most effect. However, that said, there are some trials that are going on for more moderate to severe dementia that are more about, cognitive enhancement or management of, psychiatric symptoms. So there was a more recent treatment approved called Rexulti that helps with some of the agitation that is seen in Alzheimer's disease. We aren't a site for any of these trials here at UCSF, but you can go on to clinicaltrials.org and see if there's one that might work for your family. Sorry, .gov. Clinicaltrials.gov, not .org. But yeah, so that's sort of where the field is right now. I would anticipate though that as we have the trials that hopefully are coming out more and more positive for early disease, we will then go back and test these treatments in more moderate to severe disease. And then the other sort of category of question I got was, what is your thought on this treatment, that they've found works in mice? And so I will say that overall, they've probably cured mouse Alzheimer's 1,000 times. And so it's about having the careful, well-justified reason to go into patients in clinical trials. We have to be really thoughtful about it. So for a lot of those things, I will say, I think there is a phase 1 or phase 2 ongoing for patients. And so just keep an eye out to see what happens. But what I do want to touch on is the GLP-1 agonists that are so popular today, that they have noticed that patients who are on those have lower rates of dementia. And so there is actually an ongoing trial right now testing to see how effective those are in slowing disease just in patients with dementia. Ozempic is, I think, one of the common ones that everybody. So these are weight loss drugs, and they're used for diabetes. And so anyway, that trial I think is actually going to read out within the next year. And so I'm personally, December, in a few months. So I'm personally really excited about that. And certainly when my patients come in and they're on one, I say, stay on it. And maybe soon we'll be putting patients on it specifically for dementia.
So a couple of questions about biomarkers. And firstly, how are these biomarkers used for diagnosis? So, and here there was specifically a question like how to accurately diagnose symptoms. So, well, first of all, biomarkers tell us something about the underlying cause of the symptom. So then they're used together with a clinical diagnosis. So when you go in and you have your visit with the physician, then there's all these the clinical symptoms and the biomarkers aids this diagnosis. And so that there are different causes for those symptoms that can lead to similar clinical symptoms or similar memory problems or other abilities. And also it's very important to have these different biomarkers also that can tell us different information. And so there was a question about the lumbar puncture that tests for Lewy body disease in the brain, and so that can now be detected through lumbar puncture. Very accurate, so it can detect with high accuracy if there's Lewy body in the brain. And also want to stress on the importance of these biomarkers and all the research, because for many causes, for many brain pathologies, we don't have yet biomarkers that can detect the pathology underlying the disease. So all the ongoing research is very important also for non-Alzheimer's disease biomarkers?
Let's see, I got some questions where FTD was the checkbox, so I'll answer those. Let's see. There was one just asking, because I went over it pretty quickly, what some examples are of change in judgment and personality that I was talking about. So judgment is a very broad term, obviously, and I think the things that are most prominent that come up with FTD is not necessarily exercising the kind of caution that you would have expected that person to do in the past. So, for example, leaving a 7-year-old to take care of a 5-year-old, and saying, I just went out for an hour or two, I thought they were fine, they're very mature children, or something like that, or, we've heard, investments, not thinking very hard about in the way that they would have in the past, if this is an appropriate investment or not, and being very liberal about it. And those are just examples. It's not easy to come up with a set of rules that say this is poor judgment versus not, but these are good examples. And a key thing is that it's a change for that person, where they're changing their approach to how they think through those kinds of problems. Personality changes, a lot focuses on the loss of empathy, this lack of connection between the person and whoever needs empathy. It's most prominent when people, we're not always called upon to display and show maximum empathy, but I think sometimes there are clearly those times when we need to step up if somebody's had a medical problem or a loss and other things like that. And so I think those can become particularly prominent times when people will say, boy, I was really surprised at how that person reacted or didn't react. And that's one of the signs that really concerns a spouse, family member, etc. And also how people behave in public. Disinhibition is a big part of FTD, and so it might be, I give examples that don't in themselves happen that often, but are kind of, they seem to trigger people's thoughts about this. So like eating off other people's plates at restaurants, or saying, dirty jokes or things like that in places where they would have not done that in the past, or disclosing very personal things about one's family in a place or a context where you wouldn't normally do that. These are examples. They may not fit every case, but usually those kinds of things, if they sound like they match a patient, they're often the kind of thing that gets me to realize and to start talking about what it's relevant for that patient. So I think that covers a lot of the ways we listen for judgment problems and personality changes. Somebody was asking a question about how close we are to finding a treatment for granulin-related FTD. I think this is a really great question, and I picked it to answer because I always have the same answer to the how close we are answer. Is we don't really know. And the way I say that is because, as Courtney kind of highlighted, we treat what we see, and the science has led us to think this is an important part of the disease. But, if there are 500 or 1,000 steps and factors that go into the process from having a healthy brain to having a brain that's affected by any of these neurodegenerative diseases, we probably only have a lot of knowledge about a few of those steps. And what we've chosen to do, and this is true of all medicine, is that if we wait till we understand the whole process to try an intervention, we won't come up with any treatments. And medicine really is full of people who've said, this looks like important, we have approaches that might interfere with that, let's make sure they're safe, and if they're safe, we're going to try them. So if we've identified the right piece that is as really as important as we think it is, and the drug does what it's supposed to do, we'll have a treatment. And the answer is, so that's how the drugs that we're really trying to focus on now, that's the logic behind them. We don't know everything, but we know this part is really important. This drug can affect that part of the system. Let's try it. If we're lucky, and our science has led us to a critical thing, we will have a treatment. So for granulin, there are a couple of treatments right now that are being tried that are scientific and logical in exactly that way. If those treatments work, we'll have a significant treatment within 2 to 5 years, depending on which drug you're talking about. If they don't work, then we have to move up and think about some other pieces of the puzzle and other drugs that maybe are a little farther behind but need to be moved up. And if we do the trials right, and this is a big focus of particularly Adam Boxer, but we all think like this, every trial teaches us something. Even a trial where you say it failed because it didn't cause a change in the disease course, if we did it well, we learn about why it didn't work, and it helps us to focus on the next trial as to how to address that potential problem. And ultimately, the successes that we've highlighted is because people have, hopefully for the most part, learned from the last trial. And, so we might be close, or we might have a little ways to go. I probably said enough.